The shortage of housing in our country is at the root of so many problems. Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the SP show with me, Tatton, and it's the Christmas episode. Hooray! Christmas time! The great thing about the Christmas episode, lovely people, is that it's the same as every other episode, but with tinsel. Straight on to what happened last week. Well, we've had cross people. We like cross people. Well, do we like cross people? We like passionate people, but we've had some actual cross people. So, everybody is very cross. And in the House of Lords, they're the crossest of crossiers. That's how cross they are. There's a bill going through Parliament at the moment to get rid of all the hereditary peers. There are currently 92 hereditary peers in the House of Lords. Now, a hereditary peer, I know you know this, but a hereditary peer is there because their dad was a member of the House of Lords. It's a bit more complicated than that because they had to be elected. There are about 1,000 hereditary peers, and between them, they elect 92 of themselves to sit in the House of Lords. That was done by Tony Blair to kind of hold himself to ransom to keep on reforming the House of Lords, but then he got distracted by like the war in Iraq and other things and never finished the job. So now Starmer's come in, get rid of 92. House of Commons went, yes, get rid, we're in, we're doing this, done. This week, the bill reached the House of Lords, amongst whom are those 92 hereditary peers, and they're not delighted. They're not delighted by it. Check this out.
Will the hereditaries be sent away with their heads in a basket, guillotined in front of the mob to provide a gotcha moment, an act of political spite? They deserve to walk out as princes, not be pushed out as pariahs.
It wasn't just that. They called it thoroughly nasty. Class war, a class war, because they're all posh. I mean, you don't get to be a hereditary peer without being posh. That's kind of the point. So to get rid of them is class war. That's the only reason to do it. So they were cross, and this is going to keep running for a while. We're going to have cross members of the House of Lords. If you're lucky, we'll show you the clips. Peter Hollingrake is also a cross person. Now, you may have heard of him because he was the post office minister under the last government, and people thought he was doing a good job in looking after the post office people. He is now in opposition, and it was his job to oppose the planning regulations. Although, when you heard him speak about it, it didn't sound like he was just talking about planning regulations. Have a listen.
What we do not welcome is the war on rural England he is pursuing. Following on the family farm tax, the withdrawal of the Rural Services Delivery Grant, now we see the massive shift, mass house building in rural areas and on Greenbelt.
So this war, it's about planning on this instance. Now, planning is a big, big thing for this government. They've made it their pledge that they're going to build 1.5 million new houses. Well, that'd be amazing. The shortage of housing in our country is at the root of so many problems. And it makes life much more expensive for so many people. If you're lucky, in the future, we'll spend a long time talking about why we need more houses. But we need a lot more houses. They say they're going to build 1.5 million. Experts all agree that they're not going to build 1.5 million because it's just too many to do. And they say, quite rightly, this is our target. We're going to achieve it. Watch me dance. They're going to build a little bit in the Greenbelt. They're going to make housing decisions, planning decisions, less democratic, which is really interesting because no one says, oh, we're going to make it less democratic. What we want is more of a dictatorship vibe. Everyone says democracy, but no one wants loads of housing near them. Of course, they don't really mind lots of housing near them. What they mind is no infrastructure. If there isn't a dentist, they don't want loads of new houses to compete for the no dentist that's there. They don't want loads of new cars on the roads that are already struggling. So with housing, you need to have schools and hospitals and roads and whatever else it might be, sandwich shops. We're going to talk about sandwiches later. That all needs to come to this housing target of 1.5 million is going to be talked about again and again and again and again. It's one of the missions of this government is to build houses, to sort out this country's lack of housing. And it's a difficult job to do. So we'll see how that goes. Trust me, I'll keep you informed. Kemi Badenoch hates sandwiches. I'm not sure she does. The way it's been spoken about this week, she doesn't like sandwiches. She told Michael Gove in an interview in The Spectator, like peak Tory, right? Kemi Badenoch being interviewed by Michael Gove in The Spectator. Love it. She said that at lunch, she doesn't really want a sandwich. She wants real food. She doesn't think sandwiches are real food. She prefers steak, oddly, at lunch on a work day. Seems odd, but there we go. Keir Starmer's team hit back and said that he quite likes a sandwich. Oh, they're nice. I think he used the word nice. Not really a story. And it's now time for questions and comments, and you have been commenting and questioning, so thank you very much. Do feel free just to put down here your comments and questions. Lots of comments. Well, I say lots. You can go back and see. There weren't that many, but some saying that you were enjoying the video, so that's nice. Thank you very much. I'm not being flippant. Like, the difference it makes when I go to see the comments and people have said, hey, Tatton, I like that video. It's just like, oh, thanks. That's nice. And it makes me feel better. So thank you very much. So at MoleSG says, hi Tatton. Hi MoleSG. Great video. Thanks at MoleSG. The PR vote you discussed with the Lib Dems had me wondering, does anyone in Labour or Conservatives have any incentive to ever approve PR or an equivalent thereof? After the AV vote in 2011, it went quiet for a while, and it seems like it's rolling back round. But this feels like a case where the people in power will never want to budget because it would put them in, well, less power. How could this ever actually happen? At MoleSG, I think that's a really, really well-phrased, really thoughtful question, so thank you very much. It's always been the case, or for a long time it's been the case, that the people in charge of our country really quite like the electoral system because it puts them in charge of our country. And the people who aren't in charge of our country really don't like our electoral system because it stops them being in charge of our country. There is very little about which Nigel Farage off of Reform and Carla Denyer off of the Greens agree, but they both agree that we should have proportional representation. Reform would be a real serious powerhouse in the House of Commons chamber if we had proportional representation, which is obviously why Nigel Farage wants it. The AV referendum was difficult because AV referendum was a vote on changing the voting system, and the Liberal Democrats demanded that as part of the coalition deal that Nick Clegg did with David Cameron way back in 2010. It's complicated because AV isn't proportional representation at all. It's not. It's just not proportional representation. But it did put to bed electoral reform a bit, and it is back now. But one of the reasons it's back is because we've got so many opposition parties knocking about these days. The people who want to have more of a voice. Will it ever happen? It could. Parties in power do sometimes do things that won't directly benefit them, but for the good of the party. You know, you don't get into politics just to make yourself look good. Okay, some people probably do. But generally, you don't get into politics to make yourself look good. You do it for the good of the country. It might happen. I think the most likely route to it is through another coalition. I think that Labour Party are going to have to work very hard to maintain their majority over the next 5 years because conditions are tough. So it's not impossible that we could be looking at a Labour Liberal Democrat, for example, coalition in 5 years' time, or maybe a Conservative Reform coalition in 5 years' time, or something like that. Who knows? PR could be a part of it. And times change. Leaders change. Parties change. What is very possible or likely now could have been felt like it was impossible 5 years ago. We'll see. We will wait and see. Could this ever actually happen? Yes, it could, MoleSG. Is it going to happen in the next 5 years? No. Okay, lovely people. Thursday, is Christmas Day, right? You may be thinking, no, famously the 25th of December there, Tatty, my old chum, you've made a mistake. No. The Liaison Committee is happening this Thursday. And the Liaison Committee is the greatest day of the year. Or sometimes it's twice a year. Occasionally we get it 3 times a year. We'll get to why the Liaison Committee is the greatest thing in a minute. The government is run by the Prime Minister. Keir Starmer is the leader of the Labour Party. He's the Prime Minister. He runs the government. It's his job to solve our problems and to appoint people into teams so that they can solve our problems for us, and so that we can have this wonderful group of people getting out there, getting things done, building houses, getting the NHS better, making our brains big in schools, making sure children aren't poor, and all of this stuff is the government. If they want to get anything done, they've got to get Parliament's approval, which means they've got to get their idea into Parliament, and Parliament have a look at it, and they rubber stamp it, and out it comes again. Right? Maybe with some changes in it, maybe with an additional raspberry cooling on the side, maybe as it is. Parliament keeps an eye on what the government is doing in lots of ways. It's not just when laws are being made. There are things called question times. And you would have heard of this because you've heard of Prime Minister's questions, PMQs. It happens every Wednesday and is generally really disappointing because I want it to be so good and it's always so terrible. Every Wednesday, the Prime Minister comes and for half an hour, MPs get to ask the Prime Minister questions. But there's question time every day. Different ministers turn up and are asked questions. So one day it might be the education questions and all the education ministers. So that's not just Bridget Phillipson, who is Education Secretary, but it's also the Universities Secretary and the Early Years Secretary and all these different Secretaries of State. Come and talk and take questions from across the House for an hour. We've also got committees. And committees are groups of MPs, normally about 15 to 20 MPs. And they are based around a government department. So I talked about education questions. There's also an education select committee. And that select committee will look into, in depth, an area at a time of what the education people are doing. And these committees are across parties, Labour, Conservative, Liberal Democrats, Green, Reform, whatever. And they can call witnesses and they'll call members of the public and they'll call, again, that's the Education Select Committee might call head teachers. They might call, year 12s if they're looking at A-level somethings. And then they will produce a report that says this is what the government are doing right, this is what the government are doing wrong, this is a suggestion for the government. And often what happens is the government says, thank you very much for this report, we're not going to do any of it at all. And then a couple of months later, they do the thing that was recommended, but they want it to look like it's their idea. So they've said, well, run along now, little man. These are important. And you would have heard of select committees, but you wouldn't have heard them called that, because so often you hear them on the news and they say, an influential group of MPs has said this, because the news thinks we're idiots. Each select committee has a chair, and the chair of the select committee is a fearsome beast. When they stand up in the House of Commons, they are always introduced as the chair of so if there's an education debate, the chair of the Education Select Committee will stand up and Lindsay Hoyle-Speaker will say, we'll go now to the chair of the Education Select Committee. And their words mean things. And it's important what they say because they know what they're talking about. And this Thursday, lovely people, this Thursday, it's the Liaison Committee, the Avengers of select committees, because what the Liaison Committee is a committee of all the chairs of all the committees. All those badass MPs who know their stuff, they all sit around one big table and the Prime Minister has to come in and they just sit, long horseshoe of select committee chairs, all of them badass, all of them intelligent, all of them ready to go. All together, all quizzing Keir Starmer at the same time, and they get more than one question. PMQs, when you ask a question, the Prime Minister can deflect it because he can then move on. These badass, knowledgeable, brilliant aces get a few minutes to go back and forth with the Prime Minister, really tease out what's going on, really tease out the plans. It must be terrifying. It's the job interview from hell. You are being watched carefully and your plans are being picked apart by knowledgeable people for a long, long time. If things are going wrong, and they have done for some Prime Ministers in the past, it's tortuous. If you can take time off on Thursday to watch the whole thing, I thoroughly recommend you do it. And that is episode 4 of the SP show with me, Tatton. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining us in 2024. That is it for our 2024 run. We will be back in January, and I think on January the 10th, we'll be back. Before then, we're going to have lots of videos looking back at 2024, the highs and lows. I've been recording them, and spoiler, it's mostly lows. But I do talk about them in a very fun and engaging way, so make sure you tune in. I've got to sell that sometimes, don't I? What's left is for me to wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Do comment, question down in this bit. I read everything. I'll be looking to answer some of your questions when we come back on January the 10th. It'll be a whole new year. It'll be a whole new world between us. What can't we do? Thanks so much for tuning in. Love you, bye.